Hello and welcome to the session on Globalization and Education. The term globalization means integration of economies and societies through cross-country flow of information, ideas, technologies, goods, services, capital, finance and people. The International Monetary Fund defines globalization as the growing economic interdependence of countries worldwide through increasing volume and variety of cross-border transactions in goods and services and of international capital flows, and also through the more rapid and widespread diffusion of technology. Globalization impacts the environment, culture, political systems, economic development and human physical well-being of societies all over the world. This happens through global distribution of labor, migration of capital and human and industrial resources on a global scale, standardization of legislation and of economic and technological processes, and increased contact among different cultures. Globalization has been a historical process. Before the First World War, it was mainly led by technological forces in the fields of transport and communication. There were no restrictions on fund flows, very few non-tariff barriers, and no passport and visa requirements. After the two world wars, there was a global drive to increase integration. However, the developing countries and former Soviet bloc countries were slow to enter the process of global economic integration. Today, the driving force behind globalization is the World Trade Organization, which was established in 1995. The WTO has 142 members, accounting for about 90% of the world trade. The WTO's objective is to ensure smooth, free, fair and predictable flow of trade by administering trade agreements, acting as a forum for trade negotiations, settling trade disputes, reviewing trade policies, assisting developing countries in trade policy issues through technical assistance and training programs, and cooperating with other international organizations. Globalization became possible in the last few decades because of the technological infrastructure provided by improved telecommunication networks, information systems, including the internet, microelectronics machinery, and computerized transportation systems. The processes and factors contributing to globalization are widening markets and increase in market size, with companies not depending upon the market in a single country for their products and services. Ability of countries with surplus resources to optimally utilize their surplus, facilitating the movement of a company from a recession-hit economy to a boom economy, exploring potential untapped markets, process of cultural transformation and integration, reduction in production costs through utilization of cheap labor in other countries. There are many advantages to globalization. Movement of capital ensures that the total savings of the world are distributed among several countries. Flow of technologies among countries, development of capital markets, development of foreign exchange market. International trade is developed with allocation of resources in tune with the comparative advantages. Industrial development due to new technologies, huge capital and managerial expertise available and accessible to domestic markets. Less dependency on local markets. Demand for variety of products as a result of cultural exchanges taking place. Increase in consumption due to the availability of high quality products. increase in employment opportunities because of outsourcing to low-wage developing countries. Implications to education. The strongest proponents to globalization of education are those who subscribe to the economic perspective of education. According to these groups, the job opportunities and the needs of the economy are the driving forces for the globalization of education. The major focus of the globalization of education is knowledge, skills, and competency required for the vocations and professions in demand. By this process, all jobs, vocations, and professions will acquire the same character worldwide, demanding similar skills, professional competencies, and knowledge. The proponents for this process all opine that the educational packages being offered by foreign universities and colleges, being only job related, have neutral value and as such cannot have negative socio-cultural psychological implications. It has a multidimensional impact on the system of education. It promotes new tools and techniques like e-learning, flexible learning, distance education programs, and overseas training. Developed countries are keen on globalization of education since it maximizes their share of profit in this growing field. They are keen to trade education globally in order to take advantage of their advancement in the field. Many developing countries, because of their colonial past, regard education in developed countries to be of high quality compared to their own system of education. Education is declared as a service to be marketed, bought, and sold in the same manner as manufactured goods. For example, in the 1980s, many low-end US universities set up their branches in Japan to provide educational services to the Japanese students. However, there were not many takers for their courses and little money was being made by these institutions. So, these Japanese branches of US universities were immediately wound up. Developing and transition countries are further challenged in a highly competitive world economy because their higher education systems are not adequately developed for the creation and use of knowledge. Converting the challenges into opportunities depends on the rapidity at which they adapt to the changing environment. The opponents of globalization of education point out that one of the problems is with reference to the incompatibility between the national goals of the host country and the aims and objectives of the educational packages of the foreign universities or institutions. There may be conflict of values between the host country and the foreign university. Secular countries will not have the same goals as theocratic countries. Dictatorships will have different goals than democratic countries. Education may lead to unforeseen social disorganization, conflict, and serious disruption of culture. Foreign educational packages may be disruptive because of the inherent cultural biases. Students who receive education through the process of globalization of education may develop a sense of alienation towards their own culture. Globalization promotes competition, and this will be dysfunctional in a culture and society that seeks greater social harmony, community spirit, and social advancement. Social harmony and community spirit are based on the belief that human beings are essentially social and not individualistic, seeking each other's company and support. Globalization and India. The process of globalization started in India with the economic reforms of 1991. These reforms were geared towards integrating Indian economy with world economy. The main reasons for globalization in India were these: the public sector undertakings, PSUs, were underperforming and there were no adequate returns on the investments. B. The foreign exchange reserves were very low and India was on the verge of defaulting on foreign debt payment because of poor performance in export sector and the Gulf War. C. The domestic capital investment was inadequate to meet the need for huge investments in different sectors of the economy for increased growth rate. The economic reform packages imposed restrictions on public budgets for education, specifically on higher education budget. The Indian government and the corporate sector have recently recognized the importance of management education in the changing scenario. The integration of Indian economy with world economy presupposes efficiency and competitiveness on the domestic front as well as in the international front. Since the process of globalization is technology driven and knowledge driven, the very success of economic reform policies critically depends upon the competence of human capital. Higher education institutions are responsible for providing the human capital necessary to reap the benefits of globalization and also for providing training within the country, providing policy advice, etc. They also set the standards for primary and secondary education. Globalization is expected to have a positive influence on the volume, quality and spread of knowledge through increased interaction among the various states. The free market philosophy has entered the educational world in a big way. Commercial institutions offering specialized education have come up. The demand for higher education has increased. The growth rates have doubled among students enrolled in post-graduation and research. India has had a history of private initiation in the field of education, with the first modern schools being started by the missionaries in the 19th century. In recent times, there have been private players in professional and general education to meet the growing demands and to realize the huge and quick profits potential. Under the provisions of the General Agreement on Trade in Service (GATS), Indian education is bound to face formidable competition from foreign players. GATS has two components: A. The framework of agreement containing 29 articles, and B. A number of annexes, ministerial decisions, etc., as well as the schedules of commitments undertaken by each member government, which bind them to allow market access and or remove existing restrictions to market access. This agreement in general covers all the services, including the education services. The WTO is expected to facilitate academic institutions and other education providers without controls to set up branches in other than their own country, export degree programs, award degrees and certificates with minimal restriction, invest in overseas educational institutions, employ instructors for their foreign ventures, set up educational and training programs through distance mode, etc. Glimpses of different models operating in India at present are: 1. Consumption abroad. Information, dissemination and recruitment of students through information centers of various countries set up by embassies and private agencies. 2. Commercial presence, franchisee. 3. Training programs. 4. Cross-border supply universities. A. Campus of A university in B country and B. Distance mode of learning or virtual university. An analysis on operation of foreign universities in India reveals that the programs offered ranges from diploma, UG to PG courses such as TV production technology, business, hotel, tourism management, science, media, hospitality and communication, graphics design, engineering, architecture, MBBS, dental surgery, BBA, MBA, agriculture, science, humanities, honors courses, social studies, human languages, bachelor and masters in information technology. Duration varies from 4 months to 4 years depending on the types of courses. There are also institutions and centers assisting in the operation of foreign universities in India and Indian universities abroad. A number of foreign universities are making intensive efforts to enhance their presence in India by offering alluring packages of academic programs for the Indian student with an affinity for foreign degrees. Unfortunately, many of these institutions and universities are not accredited in their own countries. The degrees awarded by these institutions are sometimes not recognized by the parent universities because the courses are not equivalent to the one offered in the parent university. To check this, the All India Council for Technical Education (AICTE) has in September 2003 decided to regulate the entry of foreign universities or institutions into India. The franchisees offering programs or courses of foreign universities or institutions must get approval from the AICTE for starting and then continuing their programs within 6 months. They should also get approval from the embassy and must be accredited by their country's regulating authority. They should also set up their own campuses or must collaborate with an AICTE approved college. Privatization in India. Privatization has emerged in several forms in recent years in India. Privatization within government higher educational institutions is in the form of introducing self-financing courses within the institution. Sometimes government-aided private institutions are converted into private self-financing institutions. A third form of privatization is providing recognition to self-financing private institutions, and a fourth form is allowing self-financing institutions without recognition to expand. Privatization of education has led to commercialization with focus on vocational courses. The students are often given industrial training and the students are given placements in good companies. Thus, there is a strong industry institution linkage in these courses. The courses are micro-specific in course design and training. These institutions are again of two kinds: the self-financing engineering colleges and management institutions affiliated to conventional universities with the course structure, design, curriculum and examination pattern falls within the purview of national or state authority, and the self-financing private institutions which are non-affiliated to any universities and cater to the demands of the corporate sector nationally and internationally. Some of the problems that accrue with privatization and globalization in the field of education are the issue of fee structure and availability to all classes. Education should be available and accessible to students from poor economic background. It should not be left entirely to market forces. It should also retain the morality and values associated with it. Higher education in India should start being responsive to criticism and hold service providers, teachers and curriculum planners accountable to the consumers, that is students. There is another problem with commercialization of education. Corporations operate on the principles of cost reduction and profit maximization. These require introducing standardization and the packaging of product in compact, measurable configuration. When applied to education, these approaches would possibly negate its basic fabric and purpose. Education has always encouraged and represents openness, inquiry, diversity, research, and limitless learning. Commercialization of education would make it elitist, the one provided by corporations for the masses and the poor who cannot afford going to the traditional institutions of learning, and the other for the rich and the affluent. To reduce the negative aspects of globalization, India needs to concentrate on urbanization of rural areas, that is, provide facilities to rural masses. B. Nationalization prior to globalization. C. Equalization of access and opportunities. D. Decentralization of powers to the stakeholders. E. Qualification of existing institutions to the international standards. With these preparations, the impact of globalization might turn out to be positive in the long run. Let me summarize the major points in this session. This unit looks at globalization and how it has impacted the field of education. It also looks at how globalization has changed the educational scenario in India and the privatization of higher education that has resulted from globalization. Globalization is deeply controversial. Proponents of globalization argue that it allows poor countries and their citizens to develop economically and raise their standards of living. Opponents argue that the creation of a free global market has benefited multinational corporations in the Western world at the expense of local enterprises, local culture, and common people. Resistance to globalization has taken the place at popular levels and at government level as both the people and government try to manage the flow of capital, labor, goods, and ideas. Serious thought has to be given to socio-cultural implications of globalization of education. It is feared by some critics that globalization would lead to homogenization on world society. Another issue is of the quality of the Indian universities when the cream of students and staff opt for global choices. There needs to be policies on the choice that universities will make towards the poor who cannot afford the global choices. The standard of Indian universities and their capacity to compete with the world market is at stake. Our universities will have to raise standards and employ business tactics to attract foreign students to our universities. There is also the political complexity impinging on the higher education system and the possibilities under the current circumstances. To find the right balance between the benefits and costs associated with globalization, citizens of all nations need to understand how globalization works and the policy choices facing them and their societies. Now, you can try to answer the questions given here. What are the advantages of globalization? What are some of the ways to counter the negative aspects of globalization? What are the positive aspects of globalization on education? What were the reasons that led to rapid globalization in India? What are different models of foreign ventures in Indian educational scenario? Now, you may go through the books and websites given here for reference. Philosophical and Sociological Perspectives on Education, written by Arulsamy S., published by Nilkamal Publications Private Limited, 2011. Foundations of Education, Nilkamal Publications Private Limited, 2011, Hyderabad, written by Ayodhya P. and B. N. Dash. Globalization and India, Myths and Realities, by Mehta, Pradeep S. and Purnima Purohit, Kutch Center for International Trade, Economics and Environment, cited 28 July 2011. Challenges of Globalization on Indian Higher Education by Singh Mithilesh Kumar, Apijastya Education Research Foundation, cited 28 July 2011. Hope that you have enjoyed this session. We can meet again with another topic. Thank you for watching this program.